Chapter 22. Judge, who was still sleeping on Theo's bed instead of under it, got restless on Sunday morning about the time the sun began peeking through the curtains. Theo always enjoyed sleeping a little long later on Sundays, but that would not happen on this day. He told Judge to be quiet, and uh, that made matters worse. The dog needed to go outside, and after 15 minutes of harassing his owner, he won the battle. Downstairs in the kitchen, Theo said a lazy good morning to both parents as he carried Judge to the back door and released him. "Why are you up so early?" his mother asked. Judge wanted to go out. The kitchen table was covered with thick Sunday newspapers, and the way they were strewn about gave the impression his parents had been reading for some time. Theo glanced at the coffee pot and saw it was almost empty. He glanced at the clock, 6:45. "You guys are up early too," he said. "Couldn't go back to sleep," his father grunted. "Who wants pancakes?" His mother asked. She didn't cook often, and Theo and Mr. Boone knew that they would take the advantage of every opportunity. "With sausage?" Mr. Boone asked. "Of course." "What kind of pancakes?" Theo asked. "What kind do you want?" "Blueberry." "Blueberry it is." He was already opening the fridge. Theo poured himself some orange juice and took a seat at the table. A headline at the Strattenburg Gazette caught his attention. It read, "Commissioner Undecided on Bypass." He picked it up and started reading. It was not written by Norris Flay, but by another reporter. According to the story, two were in favor of the bypass. Two had problems with it, and the fifth seemed hopelessly undecided. The loudest supporter was Mr. Mitchell Stack, a 15-year veteran of the county commission and its current chairman. Mr. Stack owned a hardware store south of town and claimed the bypass would not affect his business in the least. This appeared to be true. As a businessman, real retailer, he was described as a rabid pro-growth commissioner who had never voted against a new subdivision, shopping center, apartment complex, mini mall, car wash, or anything else that might add to the area's economic development. A conservationist described Mr. Stack as being a terror to our clean air, clean water, and quiet streets. Stack fired back with a beauty. If the tree huggers would keep us in the dark ages. The reporter went back and forth with the pros and cons, and it was obvious that hard feelings were developing and tensions were high. As he read, Theo noticed a knot forming in his stomach. Why was he getting involved in such a nasty fight? He was just a kid, and this was a real war being fought by some hard-nosed politician. He thought of the Hardy and Quinn family farm. He thought of Judge and the thugs who beat him. He read on as the sausage began to sizzle in the skillet. His mother hummed in her bathrobe as she cooked away. His father was lost in the business section of the New York Times. Judge was whimpering at the back door, no doubt excited over the fresh aroma of the kitchen. Theo let him in. The public hearing on the bypass would be held before the county commission in just over 2 weeks, and from all indications, it would be a regular brawl. Mr. Stack boasted that 75% of the people in the county were in favor of the bypass, and his supporters would flood the public hearing, the massive show of strength. "Hogwash," said Sebastian Ryan of the Stratton Environmental Council. "The bypass is favored by a slim minority, and most of those are business people who want to make a buck." The opponents would turn out in record numbers. For the first time, Theo actually thought about going to the public hearing. It might be a cool thing to watch. Hundreds of angry citizens all squaring off in front of the five county commissioners. It promised to be a controlled mob scene, probably with deputies scattered around the room. Theo doubted his parents would allow him to go, but he liked the idea. He decided to think about it and maybe ask them later. Over pancakes and sausage, Miss Boone said, "Let's go to an early worship service." Mr. Boone nodded and said, "Sure." "I like it," Theo said. He didn't really have a vote in matters involving church attendance, but that rarely stopped him from offering his thoughts in the matter. The early service was more enjoyable. It ran from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. and was not as stuffy as the main worship hour at 10 a.m. At 11 a.m. The dress was more casual and the sanctuary was not as crowded. Then you guys better hurry up, his mother said. Theo and his father exchanged looks of polite frustration. It was just after 7:30. They had well over an hour to get ready. Mr. Boone would shower, shave, and get dressed in about 20 minutes. Theo, not yet shaving, could do it in 15. Both knew it would take Miss Boone at least an hour to get ready, as he was telling them to hurry. But both remained quiet. Some things were not worth discussing. After lunch and long after church, Theo reluctantly went to his room and began work on a book report. It was to be a 3-page analysis of the main characters in Mark Twain's The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, one of Theo's favorite books. He liked the book, but he didn't like the idea of spending a good chunk of Sunday afternoon writing about it. Nevertheless, he trudged up the stairs and closed his door, but he couldn't find the book. He looked everywhere, then went downstairs to the den and searched some more. Maybe you left it in the office, his mother said. Bingo. That's exactly where the book was. Be back in a minute, Theo said. He took off on his bike and 10 minutes later slid to a stop at the rear door of Boone and Boone. He locked and locked it and stepped into the little room he called his office. He found a book where he'd left it on a shelf next to his Minnesota Twins poster schedule. Theo could not remember the last time he was all alone in the family's law office. The place was always busy with lawyers on the phone, clients coming and going, printers rattling away, Elsa up front running the show, directing traffic, and Judge sneaking around looking for either another nap or something to eat. Now, though, on a Sunday afternoon, there was not a sound. It was an eerily dark and quiet as Theo eased through the hallway and walked to the front window by Elsa's desk. The conference room, with its dark leather chairs and book laden shelves, was somber and still. Theo decided he preferred the place when there were people around. The old wooden floors creaked as he headed back to his office. It had once been an old storage closet. To get there, he always walked through the two larger storage areas filled with countless white cardboard box stacks stacked neatly together. Things were changing, though. The digital age was dragging older lawyers like the Boots into the world of paperless files and storage. And not a minute too soon, Theo's opinion. Why destroy so many trees to produce so much paper that becomes useless almost as fast as it's filed away? He had these discussions with his parents. At the age of 13, Theo was already a tree hugger. There was a table where Dorothy and Vince placed files before they were officially boxed away for permanent storage. As Theo walked by it, something caught his attention. It was the name Joe Ford in bold letters on the side of a large expandable file. Evidently, Mr. Boone, having been fired by Joe Ford, was cleaning out his files and putting them away. This was somewhat unusual because Mr. Boone was notorious for leaving stacks of old files around his office for years after they were no longer needed. His brother Ike had the same habit. Took a step closer and looked at the tabs in the Ford file. There was one labeled Sweeney Road. He knew better than to pry, but Theo had a habit of being too curious, especially around the office. He opened the Sweeney Road file, flipped through a half inch of papers, and found what he thought he might find. The document was called an option, a rather simple title, and it gave the buyer the option or the right to buy 200 acres of land from the seller, a Mr. Walt Beeson, who was the real buyer. On the paper was an outfit called Parkin Land Trust, PLT. A corporation had just been created and done so in a way to conceal the face of the people behind it. Since the option he was holding came from one of Joe Ford's files, it was pretty obvious to Theo that Fast Forward had set up another company to hide behind. Most documents regarding land and land transactions were required to be filed for public record in a county courthouse. Options, though, were not recorded. Theo knew this. As he read on, it became clear the rumors were correct. Mr. Beeson would sell his 200 acres near Sweeney Road to PLT if, only if, the county commissioners voted to approve bypass. At that time, PLT would pay Mr. Beeson the sum of $10,000 an acre, or a total of $2 million. If the commissioners rejected a bypass, then PLT would owe Mr. Beeson the cost of the option, $50,000, and walk away. There was a paragraph requiring both parties to keep the option as quiet as possible. Secrecy and confidentiality were crucial to the deal, which appealed to on the surface to be a straightforward option. Nothing illegal. Developers like Joe Ford did their business by picking the next hot real estate spots and building on them. If they guessed right, they made a lot of money. If they guessed wrong, they lost a lot of money. Theo wondered how Ike had learned of this deal, but he really wasn't surprised. Ike had a knack for hearing things around town. Theo kept flipping pages. The option was signed by a Mr. Walt Beeson as seller and by a Mr. Frederick Coyle, a vice president of Park and Land Trust. No sign of Joe Ford, yet. Under another tab, Theo noticed the words Park and Land Trust Inc., and he pulled it out. It contained the documents of the newly created PLT Corporation, a company Mr. Boone had put together only a month earlier. Theo scanned the documents, the office notes, even the handwritten scribble of his father, something he easily recognized. The new company had four owners, or stockholders. Joe Ford owned 50%, Frederick Coyle owned 20%, Stu Malzone owned 20%, and Peter Kaiser owned 10%. Theo had never heard of Coyle, Malzone, or Kaiser, and he had quickly scribbled down their names. He placed the file in exactly the same position he'd found it and hustled back to his office. If he needed to see it again, he knew where to find it. He locked the rear door to the office and sped home. Upstairs, alone with Judge and with his door locked, he opened his laptop and began searching the white pages. He quickly found the addresses, phone numbers, and email addresses of Coyle, Malzone, and Kaiser, all of whom lived either in the city or county. Theo searched Mr. Coyle and learned he had been sued by a business partner 6 months earlier. Theo made a note to check the file in the courthouse. A Google search of Mr. Kaiser produced a recent story in a local business magazine featuring him and a string of gas stations where an oil change cost $20 and could be done while you waited. He was 40 years old and loved to fly helicopters and duck hunt, among other things. There wasn't much to be found on Mr. Stu Malzone, but one brief entry from an old copy of Strattenburg Gazette put icing on the cake. It was a wedding announcement 2 years earlier. Stu Malzone, aged 23, had just gotten himself engaged to one Belinda Stack, aged 21, daughter of Mr. Mitchell Stack. Both bride and groom were students at Stratton College. The engagement photo showed the smiling faces of two young people who looked younger than their ages. Theo checked the white pages again to verify what he almost knew to be true. There was only one Mitchell Stack in Strattenburg. His head was spinning as he tried to line up the facts and put them in order. Mr. Joe Fast Forward was secretly buying land to make a killing when the bypass was built. To do so, he set up the PLT Corporation to hide behind. The five county commissioners would vote to approve or not approve the bypass. The loudest supporter of the five was Mr. Mitchell Stack. His son in law, Stu, now 27 years old, had been given a 20% share of PLT by Joe Ford and done so in a way that it would not be made. On paper, a 20% share was worth $400,000, and that was before Joe Ford had set about developing the land. It was safe to assume that the 20% share would be worth far more after Joe Ford leveled the property and covered it with motels, strip malls, fast food joints, and parking lots. Theo suddenly had a knot in his stomach, a thick, throbbing sensation that made him feel sick. He walked to his bathroom, splashed some water on his face, and said a few words to Judge, who seemed completely unconcerned. An hour later, Theo was lying in his bed, staring at the ceiling. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer open and neglected open on his chest. He hadn't been able to finish a single paragraph. He kept thinking about his father. Boone was a well respected lawyer who took great pride in ethics and professionalism. He was scornful of other lawyers who cut corners and got into trouble. He served on bar association committees to promote proper behavior among lawyers, and so on. How could his father be involved in such a shady deal? He had prepared a paperwork to create the Corporation, and he had presented Joe Ford for years. Mr. Boone had even supported a bypass during family discussions. Theo admitted to himself there was a good chance his father did not know Stu Malzone. In fact, he probably never met him. Maybe he had never met Mr. Coyle and Mr. Kaiser. Theo wanted to believe his father was working only for Joe Ford and doing what the client asked him to do. Theo clung to his belief, but he was still bothered by what he had discovered. No crime had been committed, not by Joe Ford, and certainly not by Mr. But something was wrong. If it was true that a close member of Mr. Steck's family would pocket a nice profit from the approval by the bypass, and if this were made known before the vote, then Mr. Stack would be humiliated and maybe run off by the county commission. Making it known before the vote might kill the bypass. Theo knew, though, that he was in possession of information he wasn't supposed to have. Once again, he had sniffed through the secret files of Boone and Boone and allowed his prying eyes to see things that were forbidden. Now what he was he supposed to do? Maybe Ike would know. So chapter 20.